Okay, fine. Right. So let's start off with talking about who I am. So, and why is it I'm qualified to even do this? Well, I'm not so sure that I'm more qualified than anyone else, but bottom line is, from my perspective, I'm a chartered fire engineer, a chartered civil engineer, and a chartered building engineer. I've been in this industry for pretty much all of my working life. And so, I've seen this sort of thing happen many times where government brings out new legislation and you've got to implement it on the ground. And sometimes that's not an easy thing to do. So what I'm trying to do is give you, practical guidance so that you, first of all, understand what the new legislation means for you. And then you can find ways of making sure that you remain compliant with the law. The next thing I want to say to you is relevant for England. Now, to a lesser or greater extent, you probably understand that there's a certain amount of devolution that's taken place in various countries, more so in Scotland and Northern Ireland than in Wales. But because of that, in Scotland and in Northern Ireland, they're places that can develop their own legislation. They can form their own acts. They can make sure that they set their priorities for health and for education, etc., set their own budgets. So what the Scottish and the Irish Northern Ireland are doing around this particular bit of work is very different to what's being done in England. So I don't want you to go away thinking that anything I've told you applies across the border to Scotland, to Northern Ireland, and even to Wales to a lesser extent. The Building Safety Act is relevant to Wales. It definitely applies in Wales, but the way they're implementing it is different to the way it's being implemented in England. So again, be very, very careful, even taking it over to Wales. Okay, so if you've got, I don't know, a couple of HRBs in Scotland and you're hoping to hear something from me that will tell you about the process, that's wrong thinking. That's not going to happen here. So caveats over. Hopefully we can get started on the presentation. So I wanted to start with a bit of an overview so you understand a little bit about the background legislation here. And it starts off, I guess, with the Building Act 1984. And the Building Act is what leads to the building regulations down here. I don't know if you can see where I'm pointing, but the building regulations 2010 as amended in 2018, and I think again in 2022. But it's the Building Act that says that the Secretary of State has the powers to make regulations. And so the regulations becomes the law. The regulations, building regulations, becomes the thing that we must meet. And it guides how we design buildings. It guides how we will construct buildings, what sort of materials we'll use in buildings. And this is very, very relevant to everything that we'll be talking about afterwards, because it's all about making sure that everything complies with building regulations that have been set out by the Secretary of State. Okay. Then we have the Regulatory Reform Order 2000. This bit of legislation is the bit of legislation that says building owners and anyone that's responsible for buildings must make sure that they risk assess those buildings. Okay, you've got to go around the building and pick up any risks and deal with those risks, mitigate against those risks, so as to ensure that anyone that occupies that building has not got a disproportionate risk to their lives. Then, of course, we have this tragic event, Grenfell Tower, in 2017, and that's what really changed a lot of what we're seeing now. Bits of new legislation have come out, including this amendment to the regulations in 2018. And that amended bit in 2018 basically said, if you build a new building from now on, the external walls must be completely made of non-combustible materials. That's basically what the amended regulations, and that was an amendment to Regulation 7. Then we come to the Fire Safety Act. Now, the reason the fires are, some of these bits of legislation, they crept in and people haven't even noticed them. But it's best that you understand why they're there so that we can get a proper picture of what's gone on and see their relevance. But the Fire Safety Act 2021 is what basically requires you to do, I don't know if you've heard of a PAS 9980 assessment, because what it did was it said, the regulatory reform order here in 2005, there was always this argument. I'll do a risk assessment of the building, but I'm not going to be responsible for the external wall because lots of people live in this building, and they live one on top of the other, and it can't be my responsibility for all past that wall because actually someone owns a different part of the wall. Because their flat occupies certain parts of the wall, and their front doors. I can't trouble their front doors. Their front doors belong to them. So there was this question mark about external walls and front doors of flats. Who is responsible for risk assessing those? Well, the Fire Safety Act 2021 makes it very, very clear. The person with influence over the entire building has responsibility for carrying out a risk assessment of the external wall and a risk assessment that includes the front doors of flats, as well as all the communal areas. That's the bit of legislation, the Fire Safety Act 2021. That's why everybody goes around doing these external wall assessments. Okay, hopefully that's understood. This Fire Safety England Regulation 2022 is another bit of legislation that's sort of surreptitiously crept in. And that's the bit of legislation that says, look, your fire doors, you need to check them on a regular basis. And I think it basically indicates quarterly. You've got to, every 3 months, make sure you've done a check on your fire doors throughout your building. That's the bit of legislation that focuses on there. I mean, it does more than that, but that's the key bit as far as we're concerned. Then the Building Safety Act is what we're going to be talking about today, and that has made some sweeping changes to how we see things taking place in England now.